This video is going to be a little bit different. What we're doing is just simply going over about 10 hours of footage that I've ultimately decided that it's not worth actually editing all of this down. That's due to multiple reasons, such as having other things I've needed to do in the meantime, as well as some of it's gone off in a tangent. So initially I was going to do the same as I did in the first video and the second video, where I was basically just dumping all of this footage, but that ends up being a 2-hour video, which can be a lot to watch. Maybe some people have used it to put down in the background and it's just sort of been that background noise as I'm working away, but I've ultimately decided that that's not really the kind of video I want to make. So to finish off those 3 videos, I decided I would put this 10 hours into this video and just sort of commentate over it as things are happening. Now, as you can see, I am doing a lot of talking, and that's just a continuation of what I've been talking about in the last couple of videos. A little bit of a catch up on that. I am working on a mobility scooter that I will be controlling with that Xbox controller that you'd just seen. So here I am building up the little relay circuit that is used to control most of the devices that will be attached and connected to the mobility scooter. And here, as you can see, you might be able to tell I'm using a little bit of ChatGPT to help me out with some of the programming. And this is simply because I haven't connected an Xbox controller to an ESP32 before. So I'm just using it to try and speed things along so that I don't take too long when I'm debugging and learning some new code that I haven't learned before. So here, as you can see, I'm just doing some soldering, I'm adjusting some potentiometers, and I've got one potentiometer that is connected directly to a servo. And this is simply because the motor controller that I'm using to drive the mobility scooter is the original motor controller that was installed on it when it was purchased. And I'm keeping it in because it's a good motor controller. It's able to sustain everything that it needs to be able to put up with and stuff. So I decided that I wanted to keep that motor controller in as the main driver, but in doing that I have to use a potentiometer to drive it because it is very sensitive and very specific to the commands that it is getting. And I did attempt at one point to try and bypass using the potentiometer, and I ended up just spending so much time on it because it needs some very, very specific values coming to and from each of the wires. There may be ways around it, but I'm not familiar with those ways around it, and I also don't mind it being controlled with just the servo because it is a very dampened input, so it's not like it's got fine motor controls and stuff for it. It is made for old people, so it's meant to be as smooth as they were able to program it. The next part I'm working on in this is trying to figure out how to actually control the steering system. Now, first you can see there in the right sort of bottomish of the screen, now center middle, there's a circuit board there, and well, that circuit board I was originally trying to use to control this linear actuator that you can see on the screen to do the steering for the mobility scooter. Now, that circuit board, although it was marketed as being made for controlling electric motors and stuff. Oh, just a side note there, that's a little one of those little drift carts. I brought it off Facebook. It was someone else's project. They were partway through it and gave up. I have since given up on that and given it to a family member to play with. But back to the main storyline, it's this RC mobility scooter. Here I've brought out all of the control systems and everything and connected it up, and at a very basic level, everything does work, but the problem is that it's just not very smooth, it doesn't work properly, and as mentioned a minute ago, that circuit that I was using to control the motor was not quite what I needed. I needed that H-drive motor controller, which gave me forward and back control, whereas the motor controller I had there only gave me one direction of control. So I then also connected it with a few relays to force it to give me both directions of control. But I didn't really know exactly how that circuit worked, which is why I didn't know what the problem was initially, which was that if I had the motor be given a high amount of power and then suddenly being let go, and even suddenly being switched into reverse, it would throw back a high current of power back through the electrical circuits and stuff that I had built. And it did take me a little while to figure this out, but that's also purely to the assumption that that circuit was going to work as I had thought it was meant to work. But it was made so cheaply that it ended up being the main problem. Basically, how that circuit worked was that it would invert the voltage. So rather than it receiving a positive 24 volts and then outputting a modulated 24 volts of some sort, it seemed to invert it so it was a negative 24 volts from ground. And so that made a potential difference total of 48 volts. And when that was thrown back through some of the circuits, it blew up some of the circuits. And in fact, that board itself got blown up from that. And it's not at the fault of the board or anything. That was just me trying to get the cheapest parts possible. And while in theory it would work, in reality it doesn't work. So here you can see I've got the proper H drive and I'm having some trouble with it. Just because I'm not familiar with the configuration of these drives, and I eventually did find a YouTube video of someone modifying a servo and using the circuit in the servo to be able to control and drive the H drive, which has worked out quite successfully. And since then I have studied that type of controller and found better and more appropriate ways of controlling it, and I'm still considering moving into those more appropriate ways of controlling it just because of some finer tuning that I'm unable to make currently with the circuit. But as you can see, there are a ton of wires and stuff going everywhere. And this isn't even the final build, this is just me putting everything together and testing things. So all the wires and stuff are much longer than they need to be. But I think in the next video, the Simple Vlog 004, you'll be seeing it in a much tidier state, where I've actually gone through and rewired just about everything, and I've hot glued everything to the largest component. So it is looking much tidier. Now here I'm trying to debug further issues, which later ended up being just some incorrect calibration numbers that I had entered into the software. Some of it was by guess, and some of it was because I didn't realize a line of code was doing some processing that it didn't need to do, as well as a line of code doing absolutely nothing when I was relying on it doing a little bit. That was the expo curve. So that was just adjusting how sensitive everything was at particular points in the actions. I was hoping I was able to slowly turn the wheels and stuff. Now you might be wondering, why am I putting so much effort into this simple-ish project? And well, that's because I was also connecting a potentiometer to it so that I was able to essentially, control it like more of a video game rather than how it was, which was if you turn left, the wheels would turn left and then they'd stay there until you straightened them, where now it's set up so that it will straighten them automatically and it only turns the amount that you turn the stick. I then finished this video by just showing pretty much what I said at the beginning, that there is a lot of footage here and that I'm ultimately deciding not to go ahead with the long form editing. Let me know if you actually want those really long videos, but I really don't see a point in why people would want it. And also, it's not very likely that I would be watching the whole thing either. Hopefully the next video is a lot more entertaining and more to what you would naturally expect to see on a platform such as YouTube.